So today I wanted to live stream just to talk about some radicals that have been popping up, because it seems like there was sort of this lull where, okay, so when Trump got elected, his inauguration, like Antifa was just off the wall. It was insane. And then all of a sudden they like quieted down for a pretty long time. And now it's like things are kicking back up. And you know, you kind of got to wonder why things are kicking back up. And, you know, you look at the release of the IG report, you look at the fact that there's more that's going to be coming out. I mean, it's insane. And there's some leftist journalists who are out there who have a pretty decent reach, who are calling for violence openly. And, yeah, no, I saw the Q post, and it makes me wonder why the rhetoric is getting ramped up now. And it's the kind of thing that you never really, you can never see it without questioning it, basically. So now let's jump into what exactly I'm talking about here. So there was one article that was by someone named Hamilton Nolan called "This is Just the Beginning." And in it, I mean, you can see right there a picture of a burning limo from Antifa riots on Trump's inauguration day. Like, good guy right there, you know, using that as the headlining picture for his article. Opening line, though. The opening line is hilarious. Do you think that being asked to leave a restaurant or having your meal interrupted or being called by the public is bad? My fascism-enabling friends, this is only the beginning. Basically insinuating that there are people out there who are fascism-enabling to the point where they're being asked to leave restaurants and have their meals interrupted and be called by the public. Like, that... the people that's happening to are not fascists. This picture right here gives a pretty good idea of who the fascists are. But it's okay. Let's not let, you know, pesky facts or historically literate definitions of fascism get in the way here. So there were some lines in here that are particularly interesting. And there's some areas in here that I agree with, but most of them, I would just say I don't. And the things that I agree with, too, let's be clear, the things that I agree with in here, it's basically Hamilton Nolan putting on a pretty good mask and pretending that he's in favor of certain things. So let's see here now. What was one of the interesting things? I mean, all of this is pretty interesting, but I shouldn't even say interesting. It's just, if you're interested in radical leftism, it's interesting. But there are some takeaway points here that are really something that people should be aware of. So one of the things he points out, this was kind of funny to me: the weed smoking of young immigrants should get them deported, but our own weed smoking was a youthful indiscretion. Basically saying that there are people who, let's flip back over, basically saying that there are people who want young immigrants deported for smoking weed. And I can't think of one rationally minded person who's a libertarian or a conservative that I've heard say that they want a legal immigrant deported for smoking weed. I haven't heard that from anyone. And I tend to think that it's nothing but a straw man argument. Like, oh, well, there's conservatives that are opposed to weed, so clearly, if an immigrant smokes weed, they just want them gone. It's like, no, no. I haven't heard that from anyone. Yet there are leftists who are openly calling for violence. So that's not exactly this figment of my imagination. And, oh God, there's so many contradictions here. Zealots condemn gay people except for their own gay children. That sounds oddly specific. Like, I feel like there's someone oddly specific here that he's talking about. And the one thing here in this whole, you know, barrage of idiocy that I can't agree with: environmentalist celebrities fly in carbon-spouting private jets. Yeah, no, that's kind of funny to see the hypocrisy there. Leonardo DiCaprio, I'm looking at you. Okay, he talks about ostentatious charity donations while or banks making ostentatious charity donations while raking in billions from investments in defense contractors and gun manufacturers and oil companies. And there is so much else. Like pointing out, defense contractors, which by the way, you need defense. You need national defense. That's what the military is for. Okay, gun manufacturers, that seems really oddly specific. Like you seem like you have an axe to grind here with gun owners and oil companies. Well, believe it or not, oil's kind of a huge industry. Why would banks not, why would they not be involved with those things? Making charity donations while raking in billions. I'm not exactly sure where these donations are. I mean, what gun manufacturers are getting bailouts from banks? Last I checked, that's like the auto manufacturers and other things that are largely controlled by the government, like airports. They get bailouts. Like, I don't understand where a lot of this is coming from right here. And here's another part of this that I agree with. I'll flip back over here so you guys can see. He says, a well-designed, I'm right here at the top, a well-designed political system would have a built-in feedback system to ensure that those making the decisions are also subject to the consequences of those decisions. Yeah, right on. Minor versions of this are floated around every now and then. Put Congress on Obamacare. Pay elected officials what their average constituents earn. But in aggregate, of course, we have nothing like this feedback mechanism in America. The titans of money congregate on Wall Street and the titans of government congregate in D.C., and they all make decisions that often disenfranchise and impoverish and frustrate the dreams of people far away, and then they go to nice restaurants and go home to nice houses and have nice, well-paid careers for decades to come. Okay, let me try to break this down real quick here. So, I agree with the first part. A well-defined political system would have a built-in feedback system, make sure that the people that are creating the rules have to live by those rules. That makes sense, okay? Put Congress on Obamacare. Pay elected officials what their average constituents earn. That's a little bit more dicey because their average constituents don't do as much work as the elected officials. But again, it's not every elected official. There are some that are corrupt, okay? And he said, we have nothing like this feedback mechanism in America. I think that to push it to an extreme, to make it hyperbolic like that, to say that we have nothing like this feedback mechanism in America, that's not entirely true. I mean, it is to a degree. It is to a staggering degree, a degree that I don't agree with. But to push it to an absolute is a bit extreme. And also to say that the titans, the titans of money congregate on Wall Street and the titans of government congregate in D.C., and to say that they all make decisions and often disenfranchise and impoverish and frustrate the dreams of people far away. Yeah, that's big government. That's what that is. That's big government. And I wish that that's all that he complained about here was big government, but that's not all that he's complaining about. And I mean, it's not at all. And to say that they're the only reason, or that they're making decisions that often disenfranchise and impoverish and frustrate the dreams of people far away. Okay, first of all, how far away are you going? Are you going outside of America? Because then it really doesn't matter a whole lot. Okay, because in America, you should be concerned with America and what's best for America. Okay, but again, if you, I mean, okay, I spent about, God, it was probably no more than 30 seconds going through Hamilton Nolan's Twitter because I could feel the cancer growing. And it's pretty clear he doesn't want borders and he wants to abolish ICE. So you talk about frustrating the dreams of people far away. I tend to think that you're not thinking about America here, okay? And disenfranchise and impoverish the same people who make decisions that make it tougher to garner wealth and impoverish more people, I worded it correctly. I meant it that way, but let me rephrase that to make it a little bit more clear. The people who can implement policies to create more wealth are the same people who implement policies, or at least in the same positions of power, to then, you know, create this impoverished condition that he's talking about here. He also says there's little incentive for those who work within the system to change it in a way that might create the sort of negative feedback loop that can be unpleasant. Yeah, I tend to think that there's a lot of incentive to work within the system to change it in a way that would create that kind of negative feedback loop. I mean, you see pushes all the time for pay decreases in Congress. There's pushes, there were constant pushes under Obama to have Congress have to abide by the rules of Obamacare. I mean, that, and have to use Obamacare. Like, that was a pretty huge push. So I'm not sure what he's talking about here either. And he says, I mean, it's the job of the public to do that. Well, maybe you should have voted. And if you did vote, then maybe you should just accept the fact that you lost. I mean, it seems insane here. And, oh, I'm still on my face. We'll go back over here to the article. I mean, this is where it starts to get really interesting. He talks about, we have an ignorant billionaire narcissist leading our government, a man surrounded by a pack of enablers who by now have clearly demonstrated that no amount of racism or xenophobia or lies or warmongering or outright corruption will dissuade them from helping the boss do what the boss wants to do. Okay, I flipped back over, but let's go back now. So let's break this down, because this is a whole lot of buzzwords and just very empty structure. That's all that this is. So, ignorant billionaire narcissist. Okay. If he's so dumb, how did he turn millions into billions? How did he manage to become president? I mean, I get that that's, you know, that's not like, there's a logical fallacy in there, but thinking of it in a, like, you know, for this specific instance, it makes sense. Okay. You don't turn millions into billions the way that Trump did by being an idiot. And you don't become president the way that he did by being an idiot. And it certainly wasn't appealing to the racist America or the fascist or, you know, what xenophobic America. Like, that makes no sense whatsoever. And I mean, that's just, Obama won. Like, he won twice. He was re-elected. And there were many people who voted for Obama who felt that they got screwed, so then they voted for Trump. Okay, let's see, break down what else he's got here. Okay, no amount of racism or xenophobia. Okay. Black unemployment is the lowest that it's been ever. I mean, at least it's the lowest that it was ever under Obama or under Bush or under Clinton. Like, however far you want to go back, black unemployment is the lowest under Trump. And it's because, like, people have this idea of businessmen, okay, that they get rich by just exploiting people and just through coercion and blackmail and all these terrible things and corruption. And it's like, that just shows that people who think like that have never run a business. They've never had to think about how to run a business. Because you don't run a business through coercion and through extortion and through just screwing people over. You run a business through voluntary exchanges that build up wealth on both sides. They have to be voluntary. And that's the other thing, is government isn't voluntary. No part of government is like, oh, well, you can pay taxes if you want. You can get socialized healthcare if you want. No, none of that, okay? And then it talks about lies. I've been following Trump now since he announced his run for president. Oh God, it was June 2015, I want to say. June, it might have been the 15th or the 16th of June. I don't know, almost exactly 3 years ago. He's told some lies, okay? I'm not going to sit here and pretend like he hasn't. I mean, I'm going to call balls and strikes, okay? But the things that he's told lies about are not big things. It's small things. Like, it's usually something that's like, oh, this is my best friend. Oh, I know this person so well. I know so many of these people. It's things like that. It's things that he even describes it in The Art of the Deal. He talks about them as being tools to get somebody else to be more favorable to your position on something. And I mean, the other thing is, if you think about what the mainstream media calls lies, the things that they call lies and the things that are actual lies tend to not really line up all that much. Like, they say that Trump lies. I'm trying to think of a specific example of something that they said Trump lied about, and I'm blanking right now. I'm sure you guys are filling up the comment section. Oh God, there was a lot though. I mean, if you go back through some of the articles where they're calling out Trump for lying about this, lying about that, I know there's like the immigration problems in Europe. They were saying that he's blowing it out of proportion. He talks about immigration down on on America's southern border, and talks about how the cartels are running it, and there's drug dealers pouring over the border and child traffickers and all this. And they take it to mean, oh, he's saying every Mexican is this child trafficking drug dealer. And I don't know. It's like, are you incompetent to the point where you can't actually understand what he's saying, but then you call him dumb? Like, I don't understand how that works. And God, it's just trying to wrap your head around the sphere that the mainstream media has created to just like lock people in, where every single thing that they ever think of politically, they're pulling from ideology, not their own research or their own thoughts or common sense for that matter. Let's see what else. Warmongering. This was a good one. So I planned to do a recorded video with this. I planned it, but it didn't really, I decided to just do a live stream because this is, I don't know. I actually say in the description of this video, I didn't even, like, this is so small and stupid. I didn't even want to do this justice by doing a full recorded video on it. So I'm doing a live stream because it's a bit ridiculous. So let me make sure I'm still live here. Okay. I'm still live. We're still good here. Okay, that was a quick interruption. Now back over to the article. Let's see. What's the next thing to debunk here? Okay. Oh, warmongering. I'm not even done with that. So warmongering. I bet Hamilton Nolan missed the North Korea summit. I have a feeling he missed the fact that Trump is peaceful with Israel and Saudi Arabia, which doesn't mean he supports everything they do, by the way, but he's peaceful with the Jewish people and he's peaceful with the Muslims. That is incredibly hard to do. And they're not necessarily peaceful with each other, but Trump is like the peaceful middleman. And I mean, that's not warmongering, okay? Granted, there are areas of the world that are still being bombed. There are places the U.S. military still is. But to call that warmongering would either be a fabrication of the word warmongering, or it would delude what warmongering is to the point where any military activity in a foreign nation is just, oh, they're warmongering. Look at them over there. Like, no, there's a point where you're securing America's borders by having a military presence internationally, like the military presence in the South China Sea. It's opening free trade, not just to America, but to Canada and Mexico and Europe. I mean, the American military protects so many other countries around the world that have socialist systems that can't afford to spend money on their own military. And that's the thing is, Marxism, I think it was Alexander Solzhenitsyn who said, and he wrote the Gulag Archipelago. Actually, I have a copy of it right here. I bought this very recently because I don't like reading PDFs. I like reading, not online, on the book. And he said that Marxism, I think it was him at least, can't survive a decade on its own without capitalist interference. And that really resonates strongly with me because socialism is the transitional state between capitalism and Marxism. So socialism can't really survive on its own either. And we see that in the Scandinavian countries where, people like to go, oh, look at Denmark. Oh, look at Sweden. They have all these socialist systems that work, even though Denmark is like Bernie Sanders. Stop calling us socialist. We have a market largely based on a free economy here. which is arguable, but it's more so it's more free than Bernie makes it sound. But those countries are defended by the US military. So I'm not sure exactly what the concern is when he says warmongering, because I don't think that it either doesn't mean what he thinks it means, or he has this perception of what Trump is doing, but he's just historically illiterate with every other presidency, every other government, every other nation. Just has no idea. He's just like, oh, U.S. military somewhere else, warmongering. We'll call it that. And then outright corruption. I don't know where to begin with outright corruption. Where is this outright corruption? Like I just don't see it. And that's the thing, is when he says something like this, like outright corruption, it's like, if you don't know where it is, but you're not politically inclined, you could be like, oh, maybe it's out there. I mean, he wouldn't say it if it's not out there. But I'm sitting here and I cover the news for you guys fairly often. I mean, I try to put out at least, 4 or 5 videos a week. I'm not sure where this outright corruption is. It's not with the Russia investigation. I know that for a fact. I don't know. What outright corrupt? Are you saying Trump's FBI? I mean, that the FBI is corrupt. At least the upper echelons of the FBI. I mean, let me make this clear too. A lot of the FBI employees are perfectly fine people. Perfectly fine. They're out there to do their job, not mentally invaded by politics. They're just trying to do their job. The corruption is at the top of the FBI. It's the people who have power who are tied in with these political elites, okay? And that's the only kind of outright corruption that I could possibly imagine he's talking about. But given the rest of this article and everything else here that I don't agree with at all, I tend to think that's not what he's talking about. So let's flip back over here and see what other garbage is in here. Oh, this is great. Okay, so rather than detail a laundry list of all the Trump outrages, I simply ask you to consider all the very real human costs that those outrages have already inflicted on human beings in America and abroad. Some of those outrages, like ripping families apart at the border, show their costs immediately. Others, like eschewing the fight against climate change and neutering the EPA and mainstreaming white nationalist ideas, will be manifesting their costs for many decades to come. Okay, let's go through this one again. This almost gets like you just start to feel your head pounding, because it's just so god-awful tough to go through all of this. Like, I feel like we've been battling this since Trump got elected. Since even before the election, we've been battling this kind of crap. So let's see. The very real human costs, okay? Everything has a human cost. Every single system. And you just don't want to think about it. Socialism is like, you can steal a guy's pension and give it to some homeless guy, and that's great. Yeah, you feel good about that, but you stole a guy's pension. That's a real human cost. That is a cost. Because now if he doesn't have enough money for something that he needs, he dies. And the guy that isn't working for himself and doesn't have the means to hold himself up in society is continuing his genes across time. But the guy who you just stole money from isn't, because through some means, he now doesn't have the money because of socialism. And I get that it's an abstract event that could take place, but it's very real when you think of socialism on a national scale. I mean, if you're stealing from somebody to pay for someone else's health care, that person now has less money for their own health care. So now, if they need better health care, they're either having to pay more up front, or you could have like Canada. They have super hospitals, or what we call in America hospitals. They're just hospitals. And it's like in Canada, if you can pay more and go to a super hospital, but people who would have the money to pay for that, some of them don't, because some of it got taken by socialized healthcare. And now you have other people who have their lives propped up by this, and you have other people who could pay for it, who could pay for better care, who now don't get it. Okay? Healthcare is a thing. And he talks about healthcare somewhere else in here, but healthcare is like a triangle, okay? You have affordability, universality, and quality. You get 2 of the 3. You don't get all 3. And people like to pretend that the success of healthcare is determined by universality, but it's not. Nowhere else in the free market is it determined, is the success of something determined by the universality of it, okay? If everyone has something, then either the affordability goes down or the quality goes down. And with Obamacare, we saw both go down. Both. Quality and affordability plummeted, okay? And it doesn't really get much better. Socialism, like ideal socialism, is universality with quality, I guess. But then you don't have affordability. And I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what a socialist thinks the ideal healthcare system is, because they're not going to get it. But in the free market, you get affordability and you get quality. Those are the only 2 things that matter, because guess what? Those are the only 2 things that contribute to fairness and equality. Okay? If you can pay for it and you can afford it in a free market, then you get it. If you can't, like, I'm sorry, but you're not going to steal from someone else to do it. Like that's not how this works. And it's also not a human right. That's a joke. You don't have a right to someone else's labor or the product of their labor. And then he talks about, okay, pain being inflicted on human beings, talking about Trump specifically, ripping families apart at the border. I did a whole video on this. I'm not going to rehash it all. It's so painful to go through over and over and over and over. Obama was doing this. You can't have families kept together at the border without either having an open border or detaining families. Like what else do you want to do? I mean, if you just let illegals in, like they're just, I'm not sure what someone like Hamilton Nolan or these radical leftists, I mean, if they weren't calling for open borders, which Hamilton Nolan is calling for open borders, but if they're not calling for open borders, I'm not sure how they reconcile all of these different contradictions in their head. I'm not sure how they do it. Let's see here. Eschewing the fight against climate change and neutering the EPA okay, we'll stop. There's more to go on here, but fight against climate change and neutering the EPA. Complaining about neutering the EPA shows that you don't understand how free markets work. You don't understand how the non-aggression principle plays into environmental factors. And you don't understand the science behind climate change. You just don't. Like, to say that, oh, well, the fight against climate change, it inflicts cost on human lives, but you don't see it right up front. And it's like, any legislation that I've seen at all that would even start to combat this mythical CO2 climate change, which isn't based in science, by the way. CO2 levels were higher in the past, and we had a lower average or global temperature. Okay, so there is no real correlation unless you're looking at like the last 100 years. Then there's a correlation. But if you go back 500 years, 700 years, 1,000 years, look at some of the Chinese dynasties. It correlates with the solar patterns. It doesn't correlate with CO2 levels. Like, that's just, that is based in just utter pseudoscience. And neutering the EPA, I mean, that continues to show that he's not in favor of reducing the size of government. He just wants the government to exert its power how he sees fit. And mainstreaming white nationalist ideas. This is a fun one. Mainstreaming white nationalist ideas. Okay, first question is how? Because I'm not exactly sure, okay? Banning people from countries that have terrorist groups in them is not white nationalist. Wanting a strong southern border is not white nationalist, because I want a strong northern border too. I want to keep those collectivist Canadians up there. And it's also assuming that there is some kind of white supremacy in America. But if you look at any facts that would suggest privilege of any kind, assuming that inequality is inequity, I mean, you can't even make the case that America is white nationalist to any degree. Okay, because if you look at the facts, Asians do better in every area or in at least most of the areas that people say, oh, well, white people are the best in here. Like they're clearly at the top of the power structure. They're oppressing everybody else. It's like, okay, Asian people earn more. I mean, by every stretch, like they have the same rights as white people. They're not oppressed in America. By every stretch or every measuring tool, there is Asian privilege. So all the Asians out there, before you start orient-splaining to me, let me just tell you, okay, the leftists don't understand science. They don't understand facts, okay? They don't understand how power structures actually work. And that's what I think is really hilarious, is the people saying that there's a power structure in America based on dominance. And it's like, okay, you don't understand how America functions or how the hierarchy in America functions. It's competence. It's not dominance. Okay, I don't go out and pillage my neighbor's house because I want their house, even though I don't want my neighbor's house. But it's like I don't go out and just start ransacking the house of someone where I want to take their property. Like that's not how a civilized society functions. Chimps live in a dominance hierarchy. That is dominance. Lobsters live in a dominance hierarchy. Humans don't. It's not dominance. But, I mean, this guy is fairly Marxist here. Now let's see. We'll flip back over here, because there's some more. And I don't know. I have no idea what the comments are saying. Like, I'm just going here. And then I like this facade that's put up. Whether Democrat or Republican or Washington Post editorial page. Okay, they talks about finding the idea of socially shunning people because of their politics to be abhorrent, okay? Yeah, if it's abhorrent, then don't do it, okay? Even though he does later on. He talks about DC being a swamp. It's a friendly swamp, which, again, it's a reductionist argument. It's not entirely true. Not all of DC is a swamp. That's like saying every politician is corrupt. No, they're not all corrupt. It's just, I can't tell. I was actually having a conversation about this earlier today. I can't tell if people use this kind of reductionist argument, say, like, to throw something to a hyperbole, saying every politician is corrupt or everyone in DC is swamp. Like, I can't tell if they do that because they've just failed to research it enough, or if there's some kind of lack of self-confidence there where they don't think that they have a valid opinion on something, so they just want to throw it to an absolute, so then, you know, they have some kind of leeway in their opinion. Or maybe they do it because they're reductionists. They can't comprehend a more complex system than reducing it to one point. I don't know. Judging by the lexicon that this guy is using, I tend to think he's not an absolute idiot. Like, I tend to think like, IQ speaking, I tend to think he's not lower on the distribution. He's just higher on the brainwashed and emotional distribution. So let's keep going on here with this. There's more. And I'll be getting through this soon. I'm not trying to take a long time on this. It's just, it's so god-awful painful to even have to read something like this. So this is actually one of the lines that I really specifically wanted to cover. Let's see, we'll go to, well, that's kind of pointless. We'll go to right there. Poverty is an affliction of history, and the failure to remedy history's crimes of greed and self-dealing in the tax code. Sickness is often an affliction of the political decision not to build a fair and equitable healthcare system so that a small number of people can get rich instead. Tens of millions of people around the world suffer under dictatorships that are supported by America to serve our own economic ends. Goes on to say people die because of political decisions every day. Politics is real. Okay. So let's talk about this poverty and junk that he's talking about here. Okay, poverty is an affliction of history and the failure to remedy history's crimes of greed and self-dealing and the tax code. Poverty is an affliction of human nature. It's very, very rarely an affliction of history, and it's not really a failure to remedy history's crimes of greed and self-dealing and the tax code. I mean, taxation is theft. Income taxation is theft. But I don't think that's what he's getting at here. And more taxation actually causes more poverty, but more overall poverty for the society. But I don't think that's what he's talking about either. But he just talks about it being an affliction of history and the failure to remedy history's crimes of greed. So basically, looking at history as this power structure and saying the people on the bottom who have nothing because of history and the misdeeds throughout history. And he doesn't even consider the Pareto distribution or Price's law, that people stack up at the bottom. That's what happens. You ever play Monopoly? Monopoly isn't like this. It's not this tyrannical government that's just like, this is the rules we're implementing. Tyranny, crony capitalism. It's like, that's not Monopoly. You play an iterated game over enough, and you're going to get people who accumulate at the bottom, and you're going to get a finite number of people at the top. And those are the most productive people in Western society. That's why it's a competence hierarchy in Western society, which, by the way, not every human hierarchy is competence. In the West specifically, especially if you remove the collectivist systems, it's a competence hierarchy. The only reason there's some amount of dominance in there at all is because of the socialization of certain industries and certain areas of the government. That's it. Okay? Socialization and Marxism leads to dominance hierarchies. Free market capitalism and Western ideals leads to a competence hierarchy, which is exactly what you'd want, where you'd want the most productive people to be reproducing the most and reaping the most benefits from society. It makes sense. It's a motivating factor as well to move up the dominance hierarchy. In fact, moving up the dominance hierarchy is one of the oldest ingrained memes, if not the oldest, in human nature. It goes back, like that is a neural process that goes back 350 million years. That's not new. That's not society. Okay, that is ingrained in human brains. That is something every person has the innate ability, at least to conceptualize, is their position in the dominance hierarchy, or some idea of how to move up it. Okay. And he talks about, okay, this was another part that I wanted to mention. Sickness is often an affliction of the political decision not to build a fair and equitable healthcare system. A fair healthcare system is a free market healthcare system. Okay? If you want to join a little commune voluntarily, then you can. And that can act as insurance. And there's insurance even in a free market. Okay? I don't know why people get this idea that, oh, if it's not socialized, then there's no insurance. Well, yeah, there is still insurance. I'm not sure how that, where that train of thought got lost. And then, I mean, if we're talking about fair, stealing from people to prop up other people in the healthcare system or in society in general, that's not fair. Right away. Like, you're redefining what fair is because you want it to be universality. And equitable healthcare system. First of all, if you encounter someone talking about equity, just assume right off the bat, they either don't know what they're talking about or they're okay with genocide. Like, it's one of the two. I'm sorry, but it is black and white. It is one of the two. If they're talking about equity and they're pushing for an equitable system, they're either too ignorant to even be talking about it, or they're pushing for some kind of system that will end in genocide. And here I have a feeling that it's a little bit of both. An equitable healthcare system, meaning that at the end, everybody's the same. Everybody gets the same treatment, same everything. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. You can't have a system like that because you won't get people who willingly want to contribute because there's no incentive. Doctors don't wake up every day and go to work for a very minimal paycheck just to feel good about themselves. You know, they can feel good that they helped somebody. Like, there are people who volunteer because of that, but they don't go and rack up $100,000 in debt in medical school to get out and make $30,000 a year so that your healthcare system works, your socialized healthcare system. That's not how human nature works. That's not how economics works. Okay, let's flip back over here, see what we're doing. I know I'm spending a long time on my face, but I mean, what can I say? I'm pretty narcissistic on my own. No, I'm just kidding. There's a lot to talk about here, and it doesn't help to just have a block of text on the screen. So he says, this is all going to get more extreme, and it should. We are living in extreme times. Right here. The harm that is being done to all of us by the people in the American government is extreme. To imagine that Mexican immigrants should happily cook for and serve meals to people who enable a man who is determined to demonize and persecute them as subhuman criminals is far more outrageous than the idea that those enablers should not be served in restaurants. Okay, this is like the last thing I'm going to cover in this article. There's not a whole lot more that I really want to get to. I mean, there's a little bit more later on, but this is pretty much the end of the real content here. So, talks about treating Mexicans as subhuman criminals. It's painful because it's not what's happening. It's just not, but he thinks that it is. Like, Hamilton Nolan legitimately thinks that Trump thinks of Mexicans and he's persecuting them as subhuman criminals. If you cross the border illegally, you broke a law. You get charged. You're a criminal now. And if you want to redefine, like, here's the thing. If you think of criminal as this murderous person, no, someone that crossed the border and just broke a boundary law, they're not a murderer. It's not the same. But if you think of a criminal as someone who just broke a law that's a perfectly common sense law, then, okay, yeah, they're a criminal. You got to take it at face value. You got to take a criminal, like the definition of it, for what it is. You can't just redefine it and then say, they're not a criminal. It doesn't work like that, okay? And he's not talking about them being subhuman. The only people he's referred to that are even remotely Mexican, which, by the way, I like how you point out Mexican, but there's also Central Americans that come up through the southern border, so I guess way to exclude them. But the only people that are referred to as subhuman are those that are subhuman. Those that kill other people. Those that traffic children. Those that traffic humans against their will. People who deal drugs and give like small amounts for free to young people, to young teens, young kids, in the hopes of getting them addicted and making them future customers. They are subhuman. They are animals. And I have no problem saying that. Like, it's probably been like over the last week or so, I have just had like just zero craps given across the board on how I explain certain things, okay? MS-13, they're animals. They should be treated as animals, okay? People who come across the border and murder somebody, legal or illegal, I don't care if you were born in America. If you murder somebody or you commit a crime where you severely harm somebody else on purpose, you're an animal. And I don't care if you get treated like one. So, I mean, I don't have this bleeding heart for people who have no remorse for human life or individual sovereignty at all. Like, I don't care about you anymore. And I guess that pretty much sums up that little bit. I mean, he talks about, he doesn't believe that Trump administration officials should be able to live their life in peace. If you're part of the Trump administration, this guy Nolan Hamilton thinks you should be harassed constantly. And honestly, he goes beyond harassed here. I mean, he talks about it getting more extreme. So he wants more extreme than what harassment is. That's what he wants. Okay. And he says that, not being able to go to restaurants, attend parties, whatever, and to be celebrated, that's just the minimum baseline. Like, that is just the absolute bottom end of what should be happening to these people. And he says that they're pushing America merrily down the road to fascism and white nationalism. I've already covered both of those. And people are delusional if they think the backlash isn't going to get much worse. So the people pushing America down the road. Let me see if I get this right. The people pushing America merrily down the road of fascism are the people that you're going to use extreme measures against. Fascism, hold on, I had this here for a second. Let's get a historically literate definition of fascism, okay? It's what fascism is it is forcible suppression of your opposition, and it's nationalization of industry. It is those two things. So it's not left, it's not right, it's not specific to one side of the political spectrum. You know, Hitler was fascist, Stalin was fascist, Mao was fascist, okay? You can't just say that only Hitler was fascist, because that's not true. Socialization and nationalization are one in the same, okay? More or less, they're one in the same. The government is taking singular control of something, okay? Venezuela nationalized their oil industry. They socialized their oil industry, okay? Socialism is ripping Venezuela apart. And I'm not afraid to say that, okay? I've done my research on Venezuela. I've looked at the people who say that, oh, well, OPEC and America and all these other countries are causing the downfall of Venezuela. Well, maybe then in such an agriculturally rich, resource-rich nation, they shouldn't have become this, oh God, what's the term? This single market economy. They shouldn't have relied heavily on oil. When they know that, like, I mean, if a country relies on oil, if they rely on a single market, it's easy. You just choke out that single market, and now the country's in the palm of your hands. It's the same thing they're trying to do in America, except instead of choking out a single market, because they really can't, they're trying to choke out every market a little bit. And the problem is, they deflate the air out of a certain industry, and then the government has to swoop in and bail it out. Then they're like, oh, this doesn't work all that well. We need to institute these new regulations, more government interference. It's a cycle. It's a cycle. And socialization and nationalization is part of that cycle. And having a single market economy, I mean, it's your own fault if you get taken over by somebody else. Like, if your economy gets absolutely destroyed by some foreign power, like, you shouldn't have had a single market economy. And I would have a little bit more, what's the right term? Compassion, I guess, for the government. I have compassion for the people of Venezuela. Don't get me wrong. I have compassion for them. The government of Venezuela, if you couldn't see this coming, then you were too incompetent to be in a position of power. So let's see what else here is in this article. He says, wait until the recession comes. Wait until Trump starts a war. The economy's doing great. It went down a little bit, but a bubble popped. Okay, and economy is still doing great. It's still better than the anemic growth under Obama. We still have more jobs than under Obama. The unemployment rate is lower. The black unemployment rate is lower. So again, white nationalism, I'm not sure what he's talking about here. And recession just in general. I mean, did people riot in 2008 with the housing crisis? When that bubble popped? No, okay? Because people on the right tend to be civil. They tend to not be animals. And I'm not saying people on the left are animals. I'm not saying everybody is, but radical leftists are. And that pieces like this are proof of that. It says, wait until... Oh, and when he says, wait until Trump starts a war, that's another joke. I covered that earlier. Wait until the racism this administration is stoking begins to explode into violence more frequently. Read a history book. Read a recent history book. That's my favorite line in all of this. He says, actually, I quote, read an effing history book. Like, he says, he doesn't say effing, but it's read an effing history book. Yeah. Read this one. Read the Gulag Archipelago. Read Beyond Good and Evil by Nietzsche. I didn't set these books here on purpose. They were just here. Read those books. Okay? Granted, Beyond Good and Evil is not a history book. But you need to learn something about human nature if you think that any of this so far makes sense. Okay, and then he talks about, this was a good thing. Let's flip back over here. Talks about, okay, The US had thousands of domestic bombings per year in the 1970s, early 1970s. This is what happens when citizens decide en masse that their political system is corrupt, racist, and unresponsive. Okay, I'm stopping there and flip back over. The rest is just, it's regurgitated garbage. So, domestic bombings in the early 70s, that's interesting because that was Bernardine Dohrn and Bill Ayers who ran the Weather Underground leftist terrorist group. Bombed police stations. I mean, there were countless bombings. You can look this up. You can go on Google, type in Weather Underground terrorist attacks. And it's funny because I watched an interview with Bill Ayers. I watched it probably 6 or 8 months ago. It was when I was first getting this channel really going. And he actually said, oh, no, we never committed any terrorist attacks, no bombings, none of that. There was none of that. I think it was actually on InfoWars. I think he was talking to Alex Jones. And again, you can't watch this video if you're on the left. You can't watch this video and go, oh, he watches Alex Jones, everything's discredited or whatever. No, okay? Everything, you got to call balls and strikes. Everything's got to be taken with a grain of salt, okay? I'm not going to say every single thing that InfoWars has ever put out is just the greatest thing. Like, that's not reality, okay? But you can't say that about any news organization. None of them, okay? But I'm just saying, it was an interview between Alex Jones and Bill Ayers. And Bill Ayers said that there were no terrorist attacks, that never happened. That never happened. But here's this guy saying, you know, the U.S. had thousands of domestic bombings per year, which thousands, I didn't hear thousands. I heard there were like 20, okay? But anyways, we'll move on from that. I mean, he talks about citizens en masse. So assuming that this is masses of people beyond just delusional leftist groups, which is not true either. I mean, it's not masses. There was someone I saw on the news last night saying, I speak for the majority of people. That's why we oppose Trump. It's like, you can't legitimately think that you speak for the masses of people. Like you can't. How can you be that deluded? How can you be so deluded to think that that you're even in a position to speak for masses of people? I mean, that's just classic thinking that, you know, people aren't individuals. They're just products of their race or their religion or their I don't know, anything else that you want to throw in there that's just an illogical subset of people. Anything. Class. The class of people. Class warfare. Go ahead. Divide people up. Yeah. Divide people up because that's worked real well throughout history. Again, Gulag Archipelago. Read it. And corrupt, racist, unresponsive. Corrupt and racist, I've already covered. It's garbage. Unresponsive, there was a response. There was, in fact, an entire revolution. It happened November 8th, 2016. If you're a leftist, I'm sorry you weren't invited, but it happened. Where the American people upended the political system and took back power because the government had so much power before that. And the government still has an exorbitant amount of power that I'm not happy with, but it's being reduced. And that is something to be happy about. So, unresponsive, when you think something is unresponsive, I mean, there are times my computer freezes. I don't smash it into the wall, okay? There are times that the light right here next to my desk flickers. I don't smash it into the wall. I don't light it on fire. I don't scream at it. Like, to go from unresponsive to we need violence, or at least an escalation of harassment, I'm not sure how how those two thoughts exist in your head. I mean, it's like there is middle ground there, believe it or not. It's called reasonable discussion, and sunlight is the best disinfectant. That's why I'm doing this video, really, is because sunlight is the best disinfectant. Let's bring this to light and just debunk this ridiculous crap. Okay? I mean, he talks about you can't like when you aggressively F with people's lives, you should not be surprised when they decide to F with yours. Putting the healthcare system back to the free market is not effing with people's lives. Socializing it is effing with people's lives. Reducing taxes and cutting off certain organizations like Planned Parenthood and reducing Congress's pay, that's all great. But again, that's not what this guy wants. That's not what leftists want. They want that money diverted to what they want. I mean, there are still people out there who legitimately think that the NRA receives government funding. They think the NRA is like propped up by the government when it's not at all. They receive $0. They receive zero federal tax dollars. Okay, that is it. And it's funny. I've legitimately thought about joining the NRA just because of all the crap going on. Like, I've thought about it, and I haven't yet, but I'm getting closer to it. I think it's like $100 to join. It might be. I think it's around there, and that's kind of what's kept me from doing it. Is I don't have $100 to just give for something to make a political stance like this. But I mean, regardless, it's like their targets are not their targets. What they're trying to say is that you're messing with people's lives by suggesting that they need responsibilities. You're not messing with people's lives by just shoveling rights down their throat. Okay? I've said it before and I'll say it again. Your rights are my responsibility. If you have a right to not have, undue damage to your property, it's my responsibility to not do donuts on your lawn and burn your house down or steal from you or something as insignificant as smashing your mailbox. Or, I mean, there's any number of things. It's like, just because you want to call something a right doesn't mean that it's magically a right. Housing is a right in South Africa. Are they living in mansions? Do they have mansions in South Africa? No, they have white genocide down there. That's what they have right now. They have white genocide that's going to lead to massive starvation because the people are willingly doing exactly what Stalin's government did back in the 20s when they just went and murdered all the kulaks, all the productive farmers. They just murdered them. And then 6 million Ukrainians died. And that was just the Stalinist machine warming up. That was it. Warming up was 6 million dead Ukrainians. And that's what people in South Africa are going for. It's, oh, white people own the farms. Let's just kill them or take their land if they'll willingly leave. Because we can run it better, even though we saw how that worked out in Zimbabwe and it went straight into the ground. There's a funny meme. It's somewhere around here where, and I don't know, I'm not going to pull it up now, but Zimbabwe in like 2014, I want to say, they did something. It was like they kicked or they repossessed land from white farmers, and they said they didn't need the white farmers. Then in 2015, Zimbabwe had like this economic collapse, and then in 2016, their news headlines of them legitimately begging for white farmers to come back. And now in South Africa, it's like, yeah, they'll just murder them or take their land, whatever. Like, okay, I don't know how I got on the tangent of South Africa. So this is that, okay? That's these radical leftists. Now, actually, oh, this is kind of funny. I'm seeing it now. The shirt that I wore displays this kind of well. Let me show you guys what shirt I got on here. It says, my rights don't end where your feelings begin. And that's pretty much how I feel about this whole article. So, Hamilton Nolan, if you're watching, like, you're a delusional leftist. And debating you would be easier than hunting dairy cows with a high-powered rifle and scope. Okay? So now let's move on. Let's go on to the next thing that I want to cover here, which I covered briefly, but it's just Mad Maxine. I think Lionel Nation calls her MaxiPad Maxine, which is hilarious. Maxine Waters calls for political violence, and I'm going over this because I can't remember if I already went over it earlier. I don't think I did. I think I kind of just skipped by it, went right to Hamilton Nolan's article, but let's see. Okay. She said, if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them and you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere. Okay, so she's saying that all the members of Trump's cabinet, his whole administration, okay, just get out and harass them. Harass them because they deserve it, and they should know that nowhere in America are they welcome? First of all, that's heavily diluted to think that all of America is blue. Like, let's look at a map of how counties voted in the 2016 election. It is red city. The entire country, except for cities, are red, okay? And maybe some areas that are just a little nutty. But for the most part, you get collectivist systems in cities. So they think that, hey, collectivist systems work here because they don't see that they get outside federal funding. They don't see that the trash of their city goes to another city, or that they're just, you know, pulling in trash from surrounding areas. Like, they don't see any of that. They're just like, oh, it works. It works here. But it doesn't work on a national scale. Like, that's the thing. It just doesn't work on a national scale, especially when you're talking 330 million people. So that's all that I really wanted to talk about in this live stream. It was mainly ripping apart Hamilton Nolan and just the absolute idiocy in that writing. And he actually put out another article this morning, where he talked about all these right-wing fascist extremists, you know, coming after him. And I'm not a right-wing fascist. I'm not an extremist. In fact, how do you define right-wing? Because I'm largely not even right-wing. Like, I don't know how he's defining it. But regardless, it's the same thing like when Amy Schumer had her comedy special and it got 1 star, and she was like, oh, alt-righters just absolutely inundated my comedy special. And I don't know if Amy Schumer knows a word like inundated, but she basically said like, oh, alt-righters just absolutely destroyed my comedy special and flooded it with bad reviews. And it's like, no, have you considered that maybe you're just not funny? It's like Hamilton Nolan. Have you considered that maybe it's not just right-wingers that are coming after you? It's people who are mad that you're calling for violence, or you're calling for an escalation of harassment, which is violence. You're referencing 1970s domestic terrorism, leftist domestic terrorism, in a positive light, as saying, this is what happens. He literally said, when referencing domestic terrorism, this is what happens. It's just what happens, you know? People say that the government's unresponsive and, you know, forget how the mainstream media skews things. But the mob thinks that the media, or the mob isn't okay with the government. Yeah, domestic terrorism, that's just what happens. You know, like, for the love of God, man, have some civility. Okay, so that's all for this one. I'll answer a couple questions here. We'll flip over, see how this live stream's going. Yeah, okay, let's see. Oh, geez, I've been going for like an hour. I didn't even realize it was that long. Let's see here. I'm going back through some comments here. Yeah, that's the other thing. There's a lot of... It's kind of funny how many black people there are in the NRA. So, I mean, if you're going to correlate the Trump administration with loose gun rights, and you're going to say that it's this fascist group that's white nationalist, but they support something like the NRA, which is civilians owning guns, which isn't fascist in the least. It's not tyrannical or anything even close. If it's white nationalist, though, why would black people join it? Like, that just doesn't make sense at all. Let's see. They have a scientific problem. For every action, there is an opposite and equal reaction. Yeah, I posted about this on Twitter. I'm not narcissistic enough to dig up the tweet right now, but and I'm not going to plug my Twitter again. I mean, people know where to find me, but I actually talked about how Maxine Waters this was before I read the Hamilton Nolan piece. Maxine Waters is delusional if she thinks that she can call for harassment of Trump officials without having that reciprocate on her own party. But again, I don't think it entirely will, because, you know, people who tend to be more conservative tend to have more values. We're not as driven by our deepest impulses, I guess. We have a, or I shouldn't even say that we're not driven by our deepest impulses, because every person is, but we have more civility. There's a reason, like we see a reason to be civil. The modern day left has gone so extreme that they don't see a reason to be civil. Like they think that when you have someone as racist and xenophobic and sexist as Trump, you just need to act out against it. And it's like, yeah, don't worry about civil debate or, you know, voting. Just fight your opposition. Just get out and firebomb them. Put M80s in glass jars like they did at Trump's inauguration. Let's see. Is what Maxine said truly legitimately illegal? No, it's not legitimately illegal. It's not illegal to say those things, but it's a call for harassment. I'm not saying that what she said is illegal. It is a call for harassment, though, and it's a call for the political left to behave even more like animals. I mean, if you look at it was the Democratic Socialists of D.C. who shouted out Kirstjen Nielsen, the DHS secretary. They shouted her out of a restaurant. That's not civil. Okay, that is not even in the least civil. Okay, and when people, I think it was at Red Hen, shouted out Sarah Huckabee Sanders, again, not civil people looking for any kind of civil discourse. Not at all. And, okay, yeah, there are people, I mean, it's one thing to complain about an administration, to complain about things that they're doing, okay? But there are times where it's legitimate and there are times where it's not. There wasn't one legitimate instance given in this entire Hamilton-Nolan article. Maxine Waters hasn't cited one legitimate instance. And I'm not using legitimate, I'm not redefining it to my own terms. I mean, if you have facts to back up what you're saying and you have a philosophy behind it that you can prove puts you in the realm of being right here and having a legitimate reason to just bring something to the table, then that's different, okay? But nothing that the left is saying is legitimate. I'm not driven by my deepest impulses, or every stupid person I ever would have met would be dead. Yeah, okay, yeah, but you're driven by a deeper impulse there to not kill people because you don't want the ramifications of that. So you're still driven by deeper impulses. If you can't say the truth, then please say nothing straight up. Yeah, no, exactly. That's the thing, is I wouldn't report on something if I didn't feel like I could accurately report on it. Like, otherwise I'd just be ignorant. Like, I wouldn't get up here and talk about something that I have no ability to talk about. High treason has never been mentioned once for these people's actions. Thanks for throwing my name in there too. Yeah, no, it's tough to always determine what constitutes high treason, especially with statements as vague as Maxine Waters. But there are definitely people who were in the Obama administration, involved with Hillary Clinton, who are involved with Antifa, who could definitely be charged with high treason. Absolutely. Okay, so I think I'm going to end it there just because I don't want this video to carry on too long for anyone watching it after the fact. I'm going to cut out the first beginning part too, like I said, where I'm just, you know, getting people introduced, worrying about the audio crap. I don't even know if that ever got figured out. I sure hope it did. I kind of just went off. Okay, I'll answer one more question here just to cap it off. Let's see, one more question. I'll scroll back. If I can't find anything, I'll scroll forward a bit. Yeah, Omar Navarro, Andy Shin. Thank you for mentioning Omar Navarro. I follow him on Twitter. I'd love to. You know what would be great? I've always wanted to do this. Is if people go on Twitter and they're like, please do a video with Ben Shields from the Right Media. Like, if people do that for Omar Navarro, I'd love to have Omar Navarro on to talk to him. I mean, that would be so much fun. because he is someone who legitimately, he's the only person who has a legitimate chance to take down Maxine Waters. And the problem is, Maxine Waters is in a district that's like 85% voting Democrat. So he has a heck of a road ahead of him, but it would still be great to talk to him because, I mean, Maxine Waters has attacked him personally, like not physically attacked him, but verbally attacked him personally because she sees him as a threat. So I'd love to get his take on a lot of that. So, I mean, if you're on Twitter and you know who Omar Navarro is, you know, if you feel like it, send a tweet at him and say, hey, Ben from the Right Media, and you can tag me too, you know, wants to have you on for a podcast or something. Okay. Okay, I'm going to get off now. I think that I've been rambling for long enough. I've just been railing against this now for over an hour, and I did a whole lot of research, like probably 3 or 4 hours worth of research before even coming here to you guys. So, I mean, I'm pretty burnt out from this stuff. Yeah, that's the thing is Maxine Waters, like once something happens from this, once someone gets hurt, like it's all fun and games to say, oh, harass them, do this, do that, you know, make sure that they're never comfortable, call them, all this stuff. And it's like, okay, the rhetoric, you don't understand. The rhetoric is going to lead to extremism. You're going to get people who are violent, who, I mean, somebody's going to snap, and all this is going to become very real for Maxine Waters. Or she's just going to push it off onto somebody else and say, oh, well, I didn't tell him to do that. It's like, how do you, like, not see the connection between what you say and what happens? And I get that there are leftists, like I'm very self-aware. I get that there are leftists who can say the same thing about Trump. Like, oh, his rhetoric starts this and it does that and does that. There's a point where you have to take what he says and realize that just because you're in a position to interpret it in a certain way doesn't mean that it's meant to be interpreted in that certain way. And that's the problem with Trump a lot of times is people on the left take what he says and they blow it out of proportion. I'm not blowing what Maxine Waters or Hamilton Nolan said out of proportion. I'm saying what they said and what their internal contradictions are revealing. Okay, I'm pointing out where this logically is going. And that's the problem is when you have someone, though, who is so deluded to try to bring everything to a straw man, like Hamilton Nolan did, it doesn't put them in a position to be able to rationally think about any of this. Because it's almost like they choose willingly to not be able to conceptualize it. And I think it was, oh God, I might mess this up. I think it was Jacques Derrida. No, it wasn't Jacques Derrida. It was Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky. That's who it was. Not Derrida. Derrida was the postmodernist piece of garbage. Dostoevsky was the one who, he said, if you're going to argue somebody's point, why would you make it a straw man? Why would you make it a reductionist argument? If you're trying to argue someone's point, make it like steel man them. Don't straw man them. Steel man them. Okay? Make their argument. Help them along if you need to. Help them. And part of that is you need to know their argument better, or at least as well as they do. And that's the thing is if you can't know their argument as well as they do, then you can't argue the other side. And that's what I feel like a lot of Hamilton Nolan, I feel like that's a lot of the roadblocks people like him run into. They're in their echo chamber. They have no idea how to argue the opposition. So it's a straw man. And I mean, that's all I mean, his writing is nothing but an unconscious autobiography of who he is. That's the best way to put it. It's an unconscious autobiography of who he is. And in this recent article that I went over, his deepest impulse for malevolence comes out. So, okay. Omar Navarro on Twitter. Omar Navarro. Navarro, I believe it is. On Twitter. Yeah, Andy Shin, thank you for pointing that out. Oh, geez, I didn't even read. Okay, I'm a little behind in the chat here. Okay, so that's all for this video. Thank you guys so much for joining in. I really appreciate it a whole lot. 113 people watching. I'm surprised you guys stuck around this long. This is fantastic. Even maxed out at like 170 people. Beautiful. So, okay, thank you guys so much, and I hope that this sheds some light on the extremism of the left. It's definitely ramping up, and I'm not sure where it's going to peak, because I didn't think that we'd see a lull after Trump's inauguration and after, especially after Charlottesville, which I'm not even justifying that. Like, all of that stuff that was going on. I mean, we saw this huge ramping up of these leftist activists getting more and more extreme. And then there was some random lull, and now we're seeing it again. And I don't think that it's legitimate. I think that it's a distraction. So we'll see where it goes from here. But okay, I'm rambling now. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. This was a whole lot of fun. I really appreciate everyone tuning in. I'll have another video out tomorrow. It's going to be a funnier video tomorrow, a little bit lighter hearted, I guess. It'll be fun. So anyway.